Welcome to The Physics of Courage. We often operate under a dangerous myth. We view vulnerability as a weakness to be hidden, and courage as a fortress, armor we put on to protect ourselves. But the data tells a completely different story. Ask yourself this. Can you think of a single moment of courage in your life that didn't require uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure? You likely can't. That is the physics of leadership. Vulnerability isn't the opposite of courage, it is the absolute prerequisite. In this session, we're going to explore Dr. Brené Brown's research to understand why you cannot be a daring leader without stepping into the arena. But before we get to the how, we need to understand where this data came from. To truly understand the physics of courage, we have to start with the researcher's original intent. Brené Brown didn't set out to champion vulnerability, quite the opposite. Her early mantra was rigid. If you cannot measure it, it does not exist. Her goal was to hack into the messy, uncomfortable topics of life, like shame and fear, and code them into a tidy, organized bento box of data. She wanted to control and predict. But the research revealed a startling anomaly: connection. The data showed that you cannot control your way to connection. You have to feel your way there. This wasn't just a research finding, it was a spiritual awakening. It forces us to ask, if we can't armor up, how do we stay safe? The answer lies in redefining courage itself. So here is the biggest barrier we face as leaders, the dangerous myth that vulnerability is weakness. It is not. If we look at the actual definition, vulnerability is simply emotional risk, exposure, and uncertainty. Now ask yourself, can you name a single act of courage that doesn't require those three things? When Brené Brown asked Special Forces soldiers this exact question, the room went silent, until one finally replied, 3 tours, ma'am. There is no courage without vulnerability. So let's flip the script. Vulnerability isn't a liability. It is our most accurate measurement of courage. But to actually practice this, you need a very specific mindset, which brings us to the one variable that separates the daring from the protected. So, if courage requires emotional exposure, what allows some leaders to lean into that risk while others armor up? Brown analyzed thousands of stories to find what separates people who have a deep sense of belonging from those who struggle for it. She found only one variable. It wasn't success, and it wasn't luck. It was simply that they believed they were worthy of belonging. She calls these people wholehearted. Because they believe they are enough, they operate differently. They have the courage to be imperfect, they practice self-compassion first, and they stop trying to be who they should be. They see their vulnerability not as a liability, but as the source of their connection. But to hold on to this belief, we have to understand the primary force that destroys it: shame. Belief in worthiness is the goal we just discussed. Shame is the barrier standing in its way. We often confuse guilt and shame, but for leaders, the distinction is critical. Guilt is actually adaptive. It says, I did something bad. It focuses on behavior and motivates us to make amends. Shame, however, is the fear of disconnection. It says, I am bad. It attacks the self. The data is sobering here. While guilt drives growth, shame is highly correlated with addiction, depression, and aggression. It's that gremlin in the back of your mind whispering, you're not good enough. And when we listen to that gremlin, our immediate instinct is to put on armor, which is exactly what we need to unpack next. When that feeling of shame we just discussed triggers the fear of not enough, we instinctively try to protect ourselves. We armor up. Brown identifies 3 primary shields we use in leadership. First is numbing. We stay busy or distracted to dull the pain. But the critical insight here is that you cannot selectively numb. If you numb the fear, you also numb the joy and creativity. Then there's perfecting, trying to look flawless to deflect judgment, and certainty, where we stop listening and start blaming, simply because being right feels safer than the vulnerability of learning. This armor might look different based on gender expectations, like the pressure to never be weak, but the result is the same. It suffocates connection. So how do we dissolve it? The answer lies in the antidote to shame: If armoring up is how we protect ourselves, shame is the virus we're trying to hide. Brown offers us the petri dish analogy to understand how it works. Shame is an organic thing that craves 3 specific conditions to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. But if you douse that same petri dish with empathy, shame cannot survive. It physically dissolves. For us as leaders, the implication is massive. We have to stop judging and start truly listening, because the 2 most powerful words you can offer someone in struggle aren't "I'll fix it." They are simply "me too." And once we establish that connection, we are finally ready to step into the arena. This brings us to the absolute heartbeat of daring leadership, Theodore Roosevelt's concept of the man in the arena. It is incredibly easy to sit in the cheap seats and judge, but as leaders, we have to adopt a strict policy. The critic does not count. If you aren't in the arena, exposing yourself to risk and getting your ass kicked alongside me, I am not interested in your feedback. But here is the catch, and it connects back to shame. Brown's research suggests that 99% of the time, the harshest critic pointing and laughing from the stands is us. It is our own internal shame telling us we aren't good enough to even enter the ring. So, how do we quiet that internal critic and actually armor up for the fight? It turns out courage isn't just magic. It's a specific set of 4 teachable skills. So, once you decide to step into that arena, how do you actually practice courage? The research changes the game here. Courage isn't a magic personality trait. It is a skill. It is teachable, observable, and measurable. It requires mastering 4 specific domains. First, rumbling with vulnerability, staying present in the tough, awkward conversations instead of tapping out. Second, living into your values, operationalizing what you believe into actual behavior. Third, braving trust, moving trust from a fuzzy feeling to specific actions. And finally, learning to rise, because if you are brave enough often enough, you will fall. You need to know how to get back up. Let's double-click on that 3rd skill, trust, because it's the glue that holds it all together. We often treat trust like a soft, fuzzy feeling, but Brené Brown argues it's actually a mechanical process with distinct parts. She defines trust as choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. To operationalize this, she uses the acronym BRAVING. Are you setting clear boundaries? Do you have reliability, doing what you say you'll do consistently? Do you demonstrate accountability and integrity? And do you offer non-judgment and generosity to your team's intentions? Now, you'll notice I skipped the V. That stands for the vault, and it is the single most misunderstood element of trust. Let's zoom in on that next. Let's zoom in on the V in braving, the vault. This is the most misunderstood element of trust. We often think confidentiality just means keep my secrets, but true trust requires that you also keep others' secrets. Beware the common trap of false bonding. We've all heard the phrase, "Don't tell them I told you." That is a trust-destroying preamble. Why? Because if you share someone else's private story with me, you're teaching me that you'll share my story with them. So apply this simple test before you speak. If the person were sitting in that empty chair right now, would you still say it? If not, you don't have the right to share that story. This requires strict integrity, which brings us to our next crucial skill set, living into your values. We often see leaders with a laundry list of pleasant words: honesty, success, integrity. But the research is sharp here. If you have 10 values, you have none. You must narrow your core values down to just 2. Why? Because in the dark moments, when you are face down in the arena, you can't recall a checklist. You need 2 accessible anchors. And you must operationalize them. Don't just profess them. Translate them into specific behaviors, like when they go low, we go high. You'll need that clarity, because living your values inevitably leads to our next challenge, how to handle the fall. Now, living into your values guarantees one thing. Eventually, you will fail. And if your team doesn't know how to get back up, they won't risk falling in the first place, which means innovation dies. This is the physics of rising. It starts down here with the reckoning, getting curious about your emotion rather than numbing it. It moves to the rumble, wrestling with that messy, shitty first draft of the story you're telling yourself. And it ends in revolution, where failure actually changes how you lead. When people know the path back up, they're finally willing to step into the arena. But be careful, because as leaders, our reaction to their fall can leave a permanent mark. We just explored how to rise from failure, but here is the sobering reality of the environment you create. Look at these numbers. 85% of people carry the memory of a shaming incident that forever changed how they view themselves as learners. Yet, 90% remember the one leader who restored their belief in their own worth. This is the weight of leadership. Do not ever question the power you hold. Working and learning are inherently vulnerable hacks. Your imperative is to build a culture where protective armor is neither necessary nor rewarded. But to project that kind of belief into others, we must first anchor it within ourselves. So how do we handle the immense weight of leadership without crushing ourselves? We have to make the final, most critical shift, believing that I am enough. See, the research shows that when we work from a place of worthiness, we stop performing and start connecting. We stop screaming for validation and start listening. We realize that daring leadership isn't about being bulletproof. It's about having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. So this is your invitation. Step out of the stands and into the arena. Ignore the critics, especially the one in your own head. Take off the armor. Let yourself be deeply seen and dare greatly.